Hello, all you wonderful people of the internet. My name is Matthew. Today, we're going to be talking about The Last of the Mohicans by James Fenimore Cooper. For those of you who don't know, James Fenimore Cooper, along with Washington Irving, were some of the first, if not the two first American writers, and in James Fenimore Cooper, the first American novelist, whose books were widely acclaimed throughout the United States and Europe. They were tremendously popular. He was primarily known for his historical romance, specifically his Leatherstocking tales, which detailed the life of Nathaniel Bumppo, which in this book is named or known as Hawkeye, and his adventures across the American frontier. And in this book, he partners with his friend Chingachgook and his son Uncas in their journey to help Major Hayworth guide Colonel Monroe's two daughters, Alice and Chorus, throughout the American wilderness during the French and Indian War, dodging the French, hostile native tribe, and a vicious Huron Indian chief known as Magua, who has his eye on one of the daughters. To give you a brief summary about this book, I enjoyed it. I didn't love it, but I did find a lot of highlights in it. But there were a few things that really hindered my experience with it. Let me start with the good. This book, along with the other ones, has introduced us to one of the quintessential American and world literature characters ever, Hawkeye. He's the stereotypical, no-nonsense, rugged individual, an unflappable male who is the typical soldier guy who has adopted the ways of the more primitive civilization and has noble characteristics and seeks to do what's right in the hostile environment. It introduces us, it's an archetypal hero, but in a way that it just works, at least for my taste. He's individualistic, he thrives on nature, he acts as an inspiration to a bunch of the other characters, including Hayward, the daughters, Chingachgook and his son. Has all these things that we now think of as tropes in other literature. For example, he names his gun Killdeer, which is just an awesome name. He has multiple nicknames. He's infamous throughout the wilderness, and it's just amazing. The other characters are great. Chingachgook, one of the last of the Delaware tribe, and his son Uncas, who goes through this coming-of-age journey throughout the book. Hayward, a do-gooding British major who just wants to do good for his country and is in love with one of the daughters. This book is also great when it comes to action and suspense. There are so many set pieces in this book, whether that be a waterfall, that be a large encampment, an Indian village, wilderness trip by canoe, which is full of action, suspense, and just great set pieces that make your heart pump. And while I do think that this amount of romance or like emotional response that comes with the romantic period of classical literature, I did find that many of the emotions in this book did work for me. Though there were some that were kind of questionable. And this is where we get into the mixed category. Remember when I said about a lot of the action or literary cliches that this book pioneers? Some of them, you can tell that they were in their infancy and hadn't fully developed yet. For example, there's this one side character that is just focused on singing and doesn't really develop. I mean, he's kind of set as a comic relief, but you can tell that this is the first time this kind of side character or trope was done in literature, and he doesn't really add that much to the table, and he's not particularly, there's not much to his character. Like I said, that this book is set in the Romance period of literature, which focused a lot on human emotion to drive plot. And I felt like the emotions in this book did work, but didn't work as well as they could have, specifically with the two daughters. The two daughters each find a love interest throughout this book. And while I did like their relationships, they didn't focus on them in a way that I felt were superb, where I could really buy it, or buy it as much as I think the book wanted me to. And at times, other relationships like that, like the relationship between Colonel Monroe and his daughters, veered into over-the-top melodrama. The last thing we need to talk about, at least when it comes to the mixed category, is the depiction of Native Americans and race situation. Now, I don't need to get into a conversation about how natives and blacks were perceived in America at that time. That's not what this video is about. And I will say, Fenimore Cooper in this book seems to treat natives with compassion. But what I mean is that this book is kind of dated, is that its social metaphoric relevance kind of falls flat for me. For example, like, Hawkeye is portrayed as someone who acknowledges and understands that native ways are in many ways have a lot of merit, but he keeps insisting that he's a man of white blood. Like, he literally keeps saying that and insisting on that, which seems to be a commentary on something that was going on at the time, which doesn't really, like, that kind of conflict doesn't exist in the United States as far as I'm aware. Also, for example, one of the main motivations of the villain is that he was exiled from his tribe because of drunkenness, which I'm not sure if that's a thing that is frowned upon in native tribes, but it seems such a bizarre thing to hinge your villain. And there are things like that, little commentaries on native civilization, which I wouldn't necessarily say they're portrayed negatively or like derogatory, but they seem very bizarre in our modern day. The last thing that we have to talk about, and this is where I think we're going to get into some serious negatives, is the prose and specifically nature descriptions. Now, James Fenimore Cooper was writing around in the early Victorian era and late Augustan era, which is circa 1820 to 1840, around that time. And while I have read books from this time period where like the sentences have like 5 clauses in them, Fenimore Cooper's prose is incredibly archaic. Now, unlike other authors like Nathaniel Hawthorne, which I have read, The Scarlet Letter, I wasn't 100% able to get into this. Usually when I see an archaic language like this, it takes me about 20 pages to really get into the flow of the writing style, and that didn't happen with James Fenimore Cooper's Last of the Mohicans. For the most part, I was okay. I would say for like 70% of the entire prose was comprehensible. Like, I had to pay attention, but it was able to flow gradually. But the other 30%, it was dense. I could get, to some extent, what was going on, but it was a slog to get through. And the last thing I want to detail that's in my negatives is the nature descriptions. While I said that Cooper does do a good job with set pieces, he does do a pretty poor, or let us say very long-winded job in describing every single part of the American wilderness, to the point where it just gets tiring after a while. And it really does drag down some of the pacing. Was that my last thing? Oh yeah. The last thing that I don't think Cooper did really well is what I call the plot. Lastly, I don't think that this book has a really good plot. Now, I think it has great adventure. What I mean by that is that, like, there's a set piece, there's a problem, there's an action set piece to resolve it. Great. But I don't think that the overarching story in here is all that good. It's very, this happens, this happens, this happens. Conflict here, different conflict there. To some extent, there is a damsel in distress story going on with the two Monroe sisters, but you don't, for the most part, you don't feel a very strong sense of building up, other than the building up as each set piece gets more and more intense. So I would say that this book's plot composition is pretty mediocre. But overall, I do think this book was pretty good. I would give it a 3 out of 5, and I suspect that some of these things might be improved on a reread. And I did enjoy this book enough to reread it. Currently, I'm about page 60 out of 600 of James Fenimore Cooper's Deerslayer, which, to be honest, I'm enjoying more. I suspect because it was written later, and Cooper may have been able to refine his style, and language did evolve to where I find the prose and the nature descriptions in this book more readable. And I enjoyed it enough. So if you're a fan of adventure, if you're a fan of frontier literature, and if you're interested in a stereotypical, well, I wouldn't say stereotypical, quintessential rugged individual hero in the form of Hawkeye, I'd say check out James Fenimore Cooper's Last of the Mohicans. I'd say take it slow, try to get through the prose slowly, meticulously, and get one with footnotes so it can help guide you through the book. But I hope you pick this one up. Have a good time, and happy reading.